Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the annual Samuel and Althea Strom Lectures in Jewish Studies at the University of Washington. I'm sorry we're not in person, but we are in community. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Washington sits on the occupied homelands of Coast Salish peoples. I am grateful to live and work as a guest on these lands. This land acknowledgement is but one small gesture in the ongoing process of working towards repairing and sustaining relations with Coast Salish lands, waters, peoples, and their other than human kin. My name is Mika Ahuvia, and I'm the Marcia and Jay Glazer Endowed Chair in Jewish Studies here at the Strom Center for Jewish Studies, which is housed in the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies. Before there was a Strom Center, it all started with the Strom Lectures. Over 40 years ago, Murray Schiff, then president of the Jewish Federation, had a vision that the UW should bring a luminary in the field of Jewish studies to the university for a series of talks to be enjoyed by all members of the campus community. He approached philanthropists in the community one by one until he met Sam and Althea Strom, whose passion for learning and academic achievement was an instant match. The Strom Lectures are now one of the oldest and most prestigious lectureships in the field of Jewish studies. Our speaker today, Julia Watts-Belzer, joins such scholars as Paula Hyman, the renowned historian of Jewish women, Aaron Rodrigue, a pioneer in the field of the history of Sephardic Jews in Turkey, and Yosef Yerushalmi, whose book Zchor on Jewish memory is absolutely timeless, and many more. You now have the chance to watch many of the Strom Lectures from the last several decades on our website, jewishstudies.washington.edu. In addition, I am excited to announce that several of our recent lectures have led to award-winning publications, including What We Talk About When We Talk About Hebrew, edited by Naomi Sokolov and Nancy Berg. Professor Jonathan Israel's 2018 Strom Lecture will be appearing as a book in this fall with the title Revolutionary Jews from Spinoza to Marx. The last 45 years have been quite an evolution for the Strom Center, beginning with that lecture series, becoming a program, and now a center with 5 full-time faculty, 26 affiliate faculty from all over the university, 2 sub-programs, and a professional staff to make these intellectuals and ideas accessible to all of you. I'm very grateful to my colleagues in the Strom Lecture Committee and to Strom Center Director Noam Pianko for their support in electing Julia Watts-Belzer for the 46th Annual Strom Lecture. On behalf of all of us in the Strom Center for Jewish Studies, it is my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for coming. The Strom Center for Jewish Studies is unique among American Jewish Studies programs in being located in a school of international studies. This scholarly location encourages us to engage with contemporary issues of global importance and challenges our colleagues to make sense of scholars of pre-modernity like me, right, who works on angels and Jewish communities in ancient Babylonia, right, modern day Iraq. I'm thankful to Jackson School Director Lila Fernandez and the rest of my colleagues in the Jackson School for their support. And I'm grateful and proud that this lecture series on reading Jewish texts in an age of climate change is co-sponsored by the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, and the Disability Studies program at the University of Washington, as well as the Washington Coalition of Rabbis. I'd like to thank each of these co-sponsors, especially for their flexibility, as they had originally agreed to sponsor the 2020 Strom Lectures, which were to take place in person with Professor Belzer here on campus last year. So we will have to make up for all the celebrations and meetings we had to postpone. I can't wait. Many of you here tonight with us have also been instrumental partners in the success of the Strom Centers dating back to its origins over 45 years ago. Thank you for your support and your ongoing commitment. And thank you to those of you who donated while registering for this event. We want to make thoughtful and critical educational programming free and accessible to all, and your donations help make that a reality. Now, before I introduce Dr. Belzer, I must thank the dream team that makes all of our public events possible and makes the Strom Lectures the pinnacle of our year's events. My deepest gratitude to our Associate Director, Dr. Sarah Zadis-Rosen, for her vision, to Kara Schoonmaker for her attention to detail, to Rosa Lastly for being the best behind-the-scenes person in the internet age. And I especially want to thank Emily Thompson, who's been the coordinator of the Strom Lectures for the last 5 years. Even though Emily is leaving us to embark on a new career, she stayed on just to see us through one last virtual Strom Lecture. Emily, our success wouldn't have been possible without you. We'll miss you. Now, I am delighted to introduce you to Professor Belser, Associate Professor of Jewish Studies and the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., as well as core faculty in Georgetown's Disability Studies programs, and a Senior Research Fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. She is a scholar whose trailblazing research represents the best of academia. She shows how drawing on the deep intellectual resources of the ancient past can benefit thinking out the most intractable challenges of our day. Much of her research centers on the writing of the rabbis, a movement of ancient men that originated in the 2nd century CE, and whose approach to the Bible and Jewish practice eventually became normative among Jews. Their writings are known as rabbinic literature. Professor Belser is an exemplary scholar in that she brings these classical Jewish rabbinic texts into conversation with contemporary scholarly approaches like disability studies, queer theory, feminist thought, and environmental ethics. Professor Belser's writings formed my introduction into disability studies, and I want to share with you some of her insights. In her words, disability isn't a medical diagnosis, but a cultural movement. Approaching disability through the lens of culture allows us to appreciate disability as a dimension of human diversity. This perspective has often been overlooked in religious communities. But like the critical, interpretive insights of feminist, queer, womanist, and liberation theologies, disability culture can bring vital, transformative insight to questions of spirit. This is from her gorgeous essay, God on Wheels, Disability in Jewish Feminist Theology, where she reads the biblical prophets Ezekiel's mystical and vivid description of God's chariot throne as a vision of God in a divine wheeled chair, and in turn celebrates the freedom and delight she takes in her own chair. Like the best scholars writing today, Belser does not simply offer a critique of society or culture. As she analyzes the written and material record of human behavior, she expands the meaning of being human. To quote her again, "To many, a disabled life highlights the weakness, vulnerability, and dependence that characterize the frailty and fragility of human flesh. But vulnerability is a shared human experience, not something particular to disability. Disability culture is marked by a lively spirit of adaptability, creativity, and resilience, not to mention a vibrant sense of delight." End quote. She makes her life experience and her resilience a teaching. One of Dr. Belser's earliest publications was actually a co-authored international health handbook for women with disabilities, developed in collaboration with disability activists from 42 countries and translated to 14 languages. Dr. Belser is also distinctive in the field of classical Judaism in that she pays attention to the most existential threat of our time, climate change. Already in 2015, she published her first monograph titled Power, Ethics, and Ecology in Jewish Late Antiquity, Rabbinic Responses to Drought and Disaster. This was with Cambridge University Press in 2015. There she explained that drought was the preeminent climate crisis of the ancient Mediterranean world and examined the way that rain is portrayed as relational in biblical and rabbinic texts. As she notes, while contemporary readers are likely to imagine the absence of rain as a natural disaster, biblical and rabbinic traditions present drought as a moral crisis, a sign that the community has failed to live up to the covenant, that the community has broken faith with God. This insight is particularly relevant today, right? Because as we know here at the University of Washington, climate change is driven by human behavior and impacts communities around the world unevenly. Responding to climate change with that in mind is thus a moral and ethical imperative. In 2018, Professor Watts-Belser published a book titled Rabbinic Tales of Destruction, Gender, Sex, and Disability in the Ruins of Jerusalem. That book illuminates how the rabbis processed the catastrophes of the destruction of Judea and Jerusalem in 70 CE at the hands of the Roman Empire. For many of my students, Belser's essays are their first examination of how subjugated minorities perceived the power of the Roman Empire. As one reviewer noted, through her nuanced readings of the descriptions of violence wrought on body, land, and nation, Belser elucidates the story's complex gender and sexual politics and critique of empire. Here it is not God, but the political power of imperial Rome that is the force behind the destruction. And instead of divine wrath towards Jewish transgression, the text emphasizes God's empathy for Jewish suffering. Dr. Belser recovers aspects of rabbinic thoughts that other scholars have missed, while also bringing into view the perspectives the rabbis themselves couldn't bear to see. Many male thinkers through the millennia have imagined suffering through the bodies of women without actually centering women's perspectives. Professor Watts Belser's proves exceptional in acknowledging what's lost when we only pursue the male gaze in antiquity. In doing so, her analysis engages and broadens the mind, but also opens the heart and honors her readers in a way that is rare. Dr. Belser currently directs an initiative on disability and climate change, which brings together disability activists, artists, policymakers, and academics to address how disability communities are disproportionately affected by environmental risk and climate disruption. Her next book, intended for a broad readership, is titled Breath and Bone: Disability Politics and the Bible, which will be coming out in 2023 with Beacon Press. I think the topic of all of her books and her unique approach will converge in the topics of the Strom Lectures this week on reading Jewish texts in an age of climate change. So today, and again on Thursday, Professor Watts Belser will take us on a journey through the Talmud and other classical rabbinic texts. Reviewers of Professor Belser's books have noted how gifted she is in making the obscure texts of the rabbis accessible to non-specialists. So if you hear a word you don't know, don't worry, just trust that Dr. Belser will guide us through it. And if you're viewing this video on the Jewish Studies website, click the link directly below the video to view a source sheet for this talk. Otherwise, you can access it at jewishstudies.washington.edu/text sheet. Please feel free to send in questions for the question and answer at any time during the talk. To send in a question, you can use your phone or open another tab in your web browser. And visit slido.com/Belser, where you can type in your questions. So again, visit slido.com/Belser at any time during the talk to send in a question. And do please join us again on Thursday for the second lecture in this series. Now, from wherever you are, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Professor Julia Watts Belser.
Mika, thank you so much for that extraordinary introduction. I'm truly honored to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to speaking. Thank you so much to everyone at the Strom Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Washington, especially to Mika, Emily, Sarah, and Kara, who've worked so creatively and so hard to make these lectures possible. Thanks also to our live captioners tonight, and to Sarah Blattberg and Kelly Stein, our ASL interpreters. During today's talk, we'll be diving into some Jewish texts. So as Mika mentioned, for those of you who might like the text in front of you, there's a link on the website to a Google Doc so that you have access to them and can move through them as you like. But don't worry, you won't need those texts in front of you. I'll talk through everything and give you what you need. I speak today at the intersection of several worlds. I'll be drawing on my scholarship as a cultural historian of rabbinic Jewish literature, particularly my studies of the way rabbinic storytellers respond to the destruction of the temple and the Roman conquest of Jerusalem, and drawing on feminist, post-colonial, and disability studies scholarship to think about dynamics of power, resistance, and resilience. But in addition to historical questions of gender, disability, and the body in ancient rabbinic Jewish culture, I also think a lot these days about contemporary questions of power and ethics. For several years now, I've been working on a project about how Jewish texts can help us think about climate change. A project that asks how ancient responses to crisis and upheaval can help illuminate a very different contemporary moment. Of course, 2020 and 2021 have been quite a time for thinking about crisis and upheaval. The pandemic has exacerbated and intensified so many existing structural inequalities. folks who were already marginalized and minoritized, are the folks most likely to be bearing more risk right now. Elders, disabled people, people living with chronic illness, queer and trans people, fat people, delivery drivers and grocery store workers, bus drivers, janitors, people without health insurance, those living in poverty, those in prison, those in group homes, those who are homeless. Discrimination, says theorist Rob Nixon, predates disaster. From nursing home policy that left so many elders and people with disabilities facing the worst of this pandemic, while their staff were underpaid and overworked and often without protective equipment, to quarantine plans that only work if you've got substantial savings and paid sick leave, or vaccination rollouts that depend on easy access to a personal car. All of these realities leave communities of color, elders, disabled folks, and people living in poverty devastated by pandemic. These are the same structural inequalities that leave people from minoritized communities significantly more at risk from climate change. When I'm talking about climate change, I don't just mean things like eventual sea level rise. I'm thinking particularly about hurricanes, floods, tsunamis, wildfires. Climate change intensifies extreme weather, meaning we face storms that are more frequent and more violent. Disaster is becoming a part of our new normal. But there's a crucial dimension of this question that I want to lift up, a recognition that environmental harm is unevenly distributed. While all of us are affected, some of us live closer to the storm. Minoritized communities face greater harm and greater risk. Because of that, I can't think about climate questions without thinking about power and privilege, without thinking about whose bodies bear the brunt of environmental violence. So let me tell you a story, a Jewish story from the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is a vast compendium of post-biblical Jewish law and lore that's usually dated to the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era. This isn't really a story about climate change, and it's not a story that advocates for environmental virtue. There's a lot of good Jewish work that draws out of ancient Jewish sources on the environment. Jewish environmental organizing often aims to lift up the wisdom and good counsel of Jewish tradition, to show how deep the tradition of earth care goes. But I want to take us in a different direction. Rather than examining what the ancient rabbis had to say about the urgency of environmental responsibility, I'm asking what they knew about the emotional terrain we face when we today confront climate change. I want to know how they thought about grief, how they tangled with power and violence, how they grappled with loss, with almost unimaginable change. I've been working most closely with ancient Jewish sources about the destruction of the Jerusalem temple and the Roman devastation of the province of Judea. The Roman conquest of Jerusalem was probably the most cataclysmic, world-altering event for Jews in the ancient world. Roman armies destroyed the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE, responding with overwhelming force to a series of Jewish revolts that culminated in the military occupation and annexation of Judea. The Roman conquest was brutal. Ancient sources recount staggering casualties, not just of soldiers, but also non-combatants and children who starved during the siege of Jerusalem. Many survivors were taken captive and enslaved as spoils of war. The Romans seized land, imposed harsh taxes, and brought the rebellious province under direct imperial governance. Roman dominance reshaped the land, the architecture, the very aspirations of subjugated Judea. The rabbinic movement was born amidst loss. I think because of that truth, I find rabbinic stories deeply resonant for grappling with the present moment, with the long, complex legacies of empire and exile, with the ravages of political conquest, with the lash of despair. So let me tell you a story. The story is set in the days after the destruction, when the Roman Empire has seized control of ancient Judea. Roman soldiers are in the land, on the streets, watching everyone's business, surveilling the community. One day, they see a Jewish custom they don't understand. A parade, a festival, or maybe it's a mob, an uprising. They break it up, and the community riots. And the soldiers, in a panic, send word up the chain: revolt, rebellion. So the Roman general Caesar arrives with the full force of his army to put down this supposed revolt, a wedding party, the Talmud says, a wedding party gone wrong. The conflict unfolds as a face-off between two men: Bar Droma, a Jewish hero, a man with miraculous strength who almost defeats Caesar's army. And then the Roman general, Caesar, who pleads with God, "Don't let me be subject to the hand of this one man." Ironically, it's Caesar's prayer that's answered. Bar Droma dies, and Caesar claims it's a miracle. So he decides to leave the Jews alone this time. When Caesar withdraws, the Talmud tells us, the community rejoices with extravagant feasting and celebration. The Talmud says, quote, "They ate and they drank and they lit lamps so abundant that the seal of a signet ring could be seen at a great distance." That opulent feast leads Caesar to revoke his decision. He feels those people are rejoicing too greatly, and so he comes back to annihilate them. The story closes with words I can't get out of my head. Rav Asi says, 300,000 swordsmen ascended Tur Malka, and they slaughtered there for 3 days and 3 nights, while on the other side of the mountain, they celebrated and made merry, and one side did not know about the other. Caught up in the extravagant celebration, half the people of Tur Malka feast in the midst of disaster, unaware of the slaughter on the other side of the mountain. In a theme that recurs in many Talmudic stories about disaster, the rabbis critique the luxury of the feast, the extravagance of the celebration. The story lingers on the lavish lights that illuminate the celebration, so bright you could see the details of that finely cut ring. But retelling this tale today, I think of the words of Arundhati Roy as she describes the way that violence in so many communities is silenced and unseen. Arundhati Roy writes, I think of globalization like a light which shines brighter and brighter on a few people, and the rest are in darkness, wiped out. They simply can't be seen. In Rav Ashi's words, one side did not know about the other. When I think about my own complicity in the unfolding devastation of climate change, this is the story that I think of. This is the mountain in our midst. My own life is one of substantial social privilege. I'm a white, well-off woman whose life is lit with a whole lot of light. I'm a feaster in this story. I'm one of the ones who eats and drinks and never counts the cost. One of my commitments when it comes to climate change is to help communities of relative privilege grapple with the ways we get disconnected from the realities of climate change, the ways that many of us get taught to turn away from violence, whether that's war or police violence or structural inequality or climate change. So to dive deeper into those questions, I'd like to take a look at a second story from the Babylonian Talmud. This is text 2 on that text handout. This is a story from the days right before Jerusalem falls. The Talmud tells the story of Marta, the daughter of Boethus, the wealthiest woman in Jerusalem. In the midst of a terrible famine, while the Roman army has laid siege to the city, Marta sends her servant out to fetch the finest flour from the market. Marta says to her man, go and bring me fine flour from the market. And he went out to do what she told him. But before he could fetch it, the last of the fine flour sold. He came back and he told her there wasn't any fine flour left, but plain white flour, that still remained. So she said, go and bring it. And once again, he goes out, but the white flour's gone. So he returns to tell her the news. There isn't any white flour left, but poor grade flour still remains. Again and again, the pattern repeats. The poor grade flour sells and only barley remains. But he doesn't buy that either. He runs home for permission. And when he gets back, even the barley flour is gone. This is a story, friends, a story about misjudging the nature of crisis. A story about timing gone deadly wrong. Marta fails to grasp the urgency of her situation. Because she misjudges the crisis, she misses the moment, and the window for action closes. By having Marta seek out luxurious food in the midst of famine, the Talmud once again activates that concern with luxury and opulence. It characterizes her as a frivolous and selfish aristocrat, a woman who refuses to moderate her high-class tastes, even in times of crisis. Bread is a class issue. Marta's desire for finest white flour is a sign of her elite status, while barley flour, that's a food fit only for animals, and in the Talmud's world, for those who are very poor. Our story critiques Marta's luxurious desires. Because she holds out for the richest, best food her agent can find, she forfeits her chance to purchase anything at all. We're meant to hear this tale and understand viscerally as readers, as listeners, that Marta is making a terrible mistake. Now, it's easy to castigate her. The Talmud storyteller sets her up. Right? She's a wealthy woman, a kind of caricature of elite obliviousness. How could she not know? But think about the disconnect between public politics and private circumstance. Surely, of course, Marta knew about the siege, but maybe she felt it didn't affect her. Maybe she looked into the street that morning and saw nothing much amiss. It's easy to malign her, but let's think about our own situation. Awareness is complicated. I know quite a bit about climate change. I spend a substantial amount of my time, both professionally and personally, thinking about climate disruption and the way it affects communities. And yet, I look out my window and the world I see is not on fire. I write these words and then immediately I remember. I remember the 2020 fires that raged through Washington, Oregon, and California. The flame and the fear and the smoke and the pictures of beloveds, friends. Pictures they snapped of that sick, orange, gray sky. I remember the 2018 Camp Fire, the deadliest blaze in California history that tore through the canyons and the tinder-dry foothills, that swallowed the town of Paradise, that shattered homes and loves and lives, that belched smoke and poison for miles and miles. Fire is no metaphor, or it should not be. Fire is fear and ash and grief. I wrote those lines and my hands hovered over the keys poised to delete, but in the end, I left the words I wrote together with that other thought, that counterpoint. It's precisely this tension that Marta's story allows me to name, this uncanny experience of living quite near to disaster, while also inhabiting a world in which nothing has changed. There's another dynamic in this story that feels crucial to examine, and that's the politics of exposure, the politics of risk. Let's think for a moment about the difference in experience between Marta and her agent, the man. Marta's agent goes again and again into the dangerous streets of Jerusalem. When I read this story through the lens of environmental justice, I think about the way that well-off folks often deploy low-class bodies as a buffer against risk. Pandemic makes that really plain. Who gets to shelter in place and who can't afford to stay home? Who has to go out to work in order to make rent, in order to survive? This is an old, familiar story when it comes to environmental justice, both around the globe and within the United States. Poor communities and communities of color bear the body burdens of toxic wastes, endemic asthma, higher rates of cancers, poison exposures. These are unequally distributed harms. Notice in our story how that risk isn't even spoken. The unnamed servant is assumed to be the one who's obviously going to be out on the streets. His body doesn't matter. Instead, the Talmudic story showcases Marta's tender, fragile flesh. When she goes out into the streets of the city, we see her body center stage. She goes out to look for flour or some other food, activating a long-standing rabbinic anxiety about women in the marketplace. And she steps her bare, beautiful foot into excrement. It's a moment that's meant to make a visceral contrast between the misery of the city and the privileged elite body. That's how she dies, the Talmud tells us. She cannot bear direct, unmediated contact with the filth of the street. Reading this passage, I'm struck by the role that gender plays. The Talmud tells this story in a way that plays upon its notion of wealthy women as both frivolous and fragile, a discourse I think we must challenge and critique. We see that gender discourse even more clearly when the Talmud recounts a second story about Marta's death. Marta goes out starving in this version of the story. She goes out starving to forage for food, and she finds nothing but the husks of some dried out figs. Those figs, the Talmud tells us, were the discards of the famous Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok fasted for 40 years in an attempt to prevent the destruction of Jerusalem. While he was fasting those 40 years, Rabbi Tzadok sustained himself by sucking the juice out of figs. That's it. That's all. And Marta, she starves while trying to eat his cast-offs. The figs highlight a critical difference between these two characters. He eats them to live, while she scavenges them and dies. But the figs are far from the only contrast between them. Marta and Tzadok experience profoundly different perceptions of crisis. Marta is the pinnacle of unknowing, a woman utterly oblivious to the realities of the siege, while Tzadok is the ultimate visionary, the one who fasted for 40 years in anticipation of the crisis, far before anyone else recognized the danger. So I want to turn now to look at one more set of rabbinic stories, two stories from the Midrash collection, Lamentations Rabbah, stories about Rabbi Tzadok and his attempt, his failure to stop catastrophe. I want to use these stories to think about the way we talk about hope. Whenever I teach about climate change, one of the questions people often ask me is, do I have hope? I do. Yes, I have tremendous hope. I depend on it and I let it power me. But I don't think I mean by hope what most folks think I do. Most of the time, people talk about having hope in terms of progress, personal agency, and control over our circumstances. Hope is about good outcomes, about getting what we want, about being the master of our fates. With climate, I hear hope evoked most in terms of rolling back emissions, stopping the threat, a kind of saving move, a rescue for an imperiled world. Now, I want to be very clear. I am all in for the political work of mitigation. I want us collectively to do whatever we can to blunt the worst effects of climate change. But I've also become quite skeptical, quite concerned about what happens spiritually and politically when we assume that hope is only about stopping the storm. Instead, I want to ask a different set of questions. Questions I've learned through my engagement with disability cultures. Questions that flow also out of critical race studies and indigenous studies. Disability communities have strongly critiqued dominant culture's obsession with cure, with the idea that the only responsibility or only acceptable response to disability is to fix it, to bring about a kind of healing that sweeps away disability without a trace. Disabled writer Eli Clare has drawn out some powerful connections between these kinds of fantasies of cure, of medical restoration, of the miracle fix, and the ecological or environmental dream of returning to a lost world, to the pristine wholeness of an unspoiled Eden. So I want to look at a rabbinic story that gives powerful insight into the dangers of this kind of curative thinking. Our story is set again during the destruction of the temple, when the Roman general Vespasian is assaulting Jerusalem. This is text 3 on your handout. The famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, negotiates with the Roman general and wins the right to rescue one person from the city before it falls. Who does Rabbi Yochanan save? He saves Rabbi Tzadok. Now, Vespasian is shocked by this. He asks him why. Why save this shriveled, old, emaciated man? Yochanan says, that shriveled body is powerful. Had there been another one like him, he says, Vespasian, you'd never have captured this city. So Vespasian summons doctors to tend the frail rabbi, and those doctors feed him little by little, and gradually they return his body to health. Now, I ask, what do we make of this story? We could treat this story as a story of medical redemption, the restoration of the sage's body through the expert intervention of those imperial Roman physicians. But I don't trust this impulse to cure. I mean, we could read Vespasian's intervention as a benevolent act, a kind of kindness, a moment of charity. But I'm more inclined to see it as an example of what the disability studies scholar Eunjung Kim calls curative violence. In this story, Vespasian's interest in cure doesn't strike me as a sensitive, thoughtful interest in healing. It's like the choice to force feed a hunger striker. It is the deliberate refusal of Tzadok's right to protest. The Roman general brings in the physicians to neutralize Tzadok's chosen fast. It's a move that denies Tzadok bodily sovereignty, even as it claims to rescue and restore his flesh. So let me contrast this story about Tzadok with a second one, another story from the same collection. It's the fourth and final story on your text handout from Lamentations Rabbah 4:11. In this story, the Midrash described Rabbi Tzadok's body as lastingly changed. There's no cure. There's no restoration. The speaker in this story is his son, Rabbi Eliezer, who tells us that his father's physical body remains permanently affected by his long fasts. Rabbi Tzadok's body never returns to its original state. In the Midrash, I think, Rabbi Tzadok's unhealed body serves as a kind of sign, a symbol of the physicality of exile and conquest. It gives physical, material expression to the enduring reality of profound change. Now, one of the things that irks me about this story is the way that it's told solely through the son's eyes. We don't get to hear Tzadok's voice. We don't know his heart. We could tell this story as a story about grief. And I think, as a historian, I think that's part of what the Midrash does. It gives us this evocative image of father and son. But I think there's another way to read this story. We could also tell this story as a story of resistance, a story in which Rabbi Tzadok is still, even long after Vespasian's conquest, positioning his body as a kind of cog in the imperial machine. He will not become a tidy subject under Roman dominance. He refuses to perform for the powers. His is a body that will not work for empire. So I've been thinking about that a lot during these pandemic days. I'm hearing so many calls, so much yearning to get back to normal, to return to the world that we lost. And I'll tell you true, friends, there's a lot of normal I want back to. There's so much I miss, so many people, so many places, so many trees. But I am also intensely aware of the ways that our old normal ran roughshod over so many people's lives, the way it shut so many people out, the way it brutalized earth and land and our very systems of survival. When I read this midrash, I read Tzadok as a man who refused to go back to the way things were. I read Tzadok as a man who said no, who demanded a different way forward. I read Tzadok as a man whose body marks the loss. I read Tzadok as a man who doesn't bounce back, as one who is marked and changed by what he has endured. I tell this story today because I think this is a story we need right now. Not the story of everything put back exactly as it was. Not the miraculous hand wavery of body and world magically restored, but a sense that living with change, living into it, adapting to it, is something that we can and must do. This is where I draw my hope. From this recognition, the knowledge that adaptation is possible. It's a lesson I've learned through disability community. Disability communities have powerful, hard-won experience in honing the arts of living well with constraint, of adapting to complex, sometimes undesirable circumstances, of figuring out how to make a way. Disability experience has also helped me think differently about what it means to ground hope elsewhere, beyond that dream of a brighter future or the return to a beloved past. I've learned a lot on this score from my friend and colleague, Rabbi Elliot Kukla, who writes about the way his own experience with chronic illness has led him slowly and painstakingly away from the belief that life only matters if it's fixed on getting better. He's come instead to a different conviction, what it means to live a present tense life in chronic illness. So let me draw this conversation back explicitly to climate disruption. Here is one thing that disability has taught me. Even when we live with a diagnosis that paints the future in an uncertain or a difficult light, the life we have can still be flush with pleasure, even when it is not the life we might have chosen or the future we might have desired. What if we approached climate change with the bedrock recognition that the situation is indeed tough, that it will almost certainly get worse? What if we acknowledged truly that the prognosis is difficult, that it doesn't always lend itself to good news? If we take those working principles not as the end of the story, But as a starting point, then I think we can have a very different conversation. If we face head on the fact that climate disruption will be a part of our lives, it lets us turn to a different question. How might we make climate disruption more survivable and less unjust? We are living into a moment where there are key questions to be asked about mitigation, about adaptation, and about equity when it comes to sharing risk. This is one of the places I draw my hope. From the work of grassroots activists and mutual aid societies, from all the ways that people have been showing up for each other, trying to blunt the worst effects of devastation. So I want to close tonight by lifting up the memory of a beloved friend, Stacy Park Milburn, Zichrono Livracha, a fierce disabled organizer who founded the Disability Justice Culture Club, a collective centering the brilliance of queer disabled people of color. In 2018, when the California fires were raging, and California's electric utility shut off power for days without making provisions for people who need power to live, who rely on oxygen, CPAP machines, and power wheelchairs, Stacy and a whole bunch of other grassroots organizers and activists stepped up to provide emergency grassroots efforts to provide life-sustaining electricity to power-dependent individuals. They helped launch and lead a ground-up organizing effort to connect folks with emergency supplies and power, to seal up windows, block out smoke, distribute batteries, help people strategize transportation, housing, crisis care. That's what hope looks like to me these days. That fierce, fragile work we do to help each other through. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is where there would be applause. Thank you so much, Professor Julie Watts-Belzer, for that gorgeous talk. Again, I want to remind our viewers, listeners, that they can submit their questions to Slido. And hopefully that is showing up on your screens right now. So I will just say, what I see you doing in this beautiful talk is talking back at rabbinic stories, right? You're drawing out the prejudices at times of the rabbis, right? For example, with a woman as fragile and frivolous. And my students are very familiar with the idea that anytime a woman goes outside the home, something bad happens. And I like seeing that very sadly affirmed in the text that you shared. But what you also do when you read these texts is you draw out kind of these small sensitive moments, like these observations in rabbinic texts. And one theme I kept returning to as you were speaking is this theme, especially in the Babylonian Talmud, that the rabbis, whenever they get kind of to the end of a conversation, trying to analyze why things are so terrible in the world, they sometimes get to this point where they just say, well, since the temple was destroyed, we live in this fallen world. So and it seems to me like they end on this kind of moment of hopelessness. Like, okay, so those things are just terrible. Human nature is terrible. And I just wonder if that was kind of a theme that you engaged with your book, and how you made sense of the rabbis and of returning to that over and over.
Thank you so much for that really beautiful question, which is right on point, I think, because it actually speaks to this complicated question about the valence of hope. On the one hand, I do think there's many sources in rabbinic literature that take the destruction of the temple as a cataclysmic moment, an extraordinary loss. It's like the wound that never heals. But On the other hand, there are other rabbinic sources that acknowledge actually that the destruction of the temple was like far and away, that it was distant, that it's not as terrible as all that, that in fact it is a catastrophe that the community has learned to live with. Right? And of course, the great irony in many respects is that it's the destruction of the temple that allows for the flourishing of rabbinic Judaism, which is the Jewishness that all of us today, for all the myriad, multiple ways in which contemporary Jews understand and think about Jewish identity and Jewish belonging and all of that, so many of us root our basic understandings of what Jewishness is, right? Not in the temple, but in the rabbinic movement, in this movement that is born out of loss, that is in effect a kind of recognition of and an adaptation to the realities of the ongoing imprint of Roman power. Okay? So if we want to think about a model for adaptation, right? Adaptation to undesirable but pretty intractable political material circumstances, I think the rabbis actually are really, the sort of classical rabbis are a really interesting model to think with. And I appreciate that there's this multivalent dimension to the way they think about their own past, the temple, destruction and loss, because as a contemporary reader, as someone who's invested not just as a scholar, but also as a person in these texts, it opens up a space for my own heart to kind of engage and grapple with and think about what it means to live after loss.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Okay, I see a question. Maybe this is a observation. I really felt your discussion of living with a prognosis that wasn't flexible and how you connected that to climate change. I feel like deeply. Thank you. I see another student from class asks, is Vespasian's healing of Tzadok an effort to make him an able-bodied worker, to erase his identity and his rebellion? What happens to Tzadok after this story?
So wonderful question, thank you, and wonderful appreciation. I really appreciate that move to think about disability experience and how it can reframe our thinking about hope and prognosis, and really appreciate that resonated with you. I'll take the question now about Vespasian and his response to Tzadok. One of the really complicated things, one of the regrettable things about rabbinic literature is that we often don't get to follow characters after they've exited, right, stage left. They've left the scene, and then we don't get to pick up their story. We don't really know what happened. So if you might have noticed, if you were attentive to the details on the text handout, that I pulled from a couple of different sources in kind of assembling these different traditions about Tzadok. So we're not even looking at one kind of single author. I mean, not that there's really any single authored collections in rabbinic literature, but we're not even looking at one body of text. We're looking at a lot of different traditions. I think sometimes that it's helpful to think about rabbinic characters as sort of coming onto the scene, often evoking a whole range of prior stories, but sometimes these prior stories are contradictory, or there's not necessarily a single solitary through line that we can construct that is reminiscent of a kind of contemporary biography where we want to know how did the story, what happened to them in their early days, and how can we follow them through their life course, and what happened to them at the end of the story. Instead, the characters I love most are always being whisked off stage right? And we don't really know what happens to them after. So this is a kind of rare case in which we have the last tradition I talked about from Rabbi Tzadok's son reflecting on his father's body. But again, you can already see there that the rabbinic corpus as a whole doesn't have one single solitary story about what happened to Tzadok. Right? It can't quite decide, was he healed, was he restored, or was he not? This is, of course, a kind of extraordinary playground for later interpreters. It gives us a lot of latitude to think about these questions, and that's really what I'm interested in doing. So, of course, when it comes to Vespasian, for all my powers, I don't have the ability to peer into his heart and know what he really wanted to do or why. I'm just suspicious, right? I'm suspicious of the curative move because, and this is partly because of my thinking within disability studies, where we see cure often deployed by architects of the dominant cultural power, right? And imposed upon marginalized or minoritized communities in ways that don't consult with those individuals or communities about their wishes. So it's notable for me that we don't have a scene in which Tzadok is, right? There's sort of no consent moment here around the arrival of the physicians on the scene. It's also really significant that Tzadok's bodily experience, right? His chosen fast, right? His bodily weakness has been it's something that he has cultivated. I don't know that he necessarily thinks of it as a desirable outcome, but it's worth noting that he is deeply intentional. This is 40 years of fasting that has changed his body and altered his flesh, and it's wiped out in this encounter with the enemy, right, who plucks him from the city, albeit at Rabbi Yochanan's request, right, but then also introduces this element of healing. Okay. So this is, I think, where I become suspicious, or where I think the story gives us an invitation to reflect on the power politics at play in that move, and to ask them the broader question. I think we often sort of the default assumption about healing is that, oh, healing is always a good thing. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's always a benevolent impulse. And I think this story asks us, is that always true? What are the circumstances and the power differentials that might make certain communities have a very strong interest in managing the bodies of their presumed subordinates, right? And making sure those bodies present in a particular way. Of course, this is super relevant when we think about workers' experience today, right? A lot of people's bodies, right, are profitable if and when they're working in a particular way.
Thank you. While you were speaking, I was thinking about how rabbinic literature is kind of like the multiverse. There's constant. It's never just one story. It's multiple stories at the same time, all the time.
Yes.
So Ali asks, are there any examples in rabbinic literature about how young people coped with catastrophe? The future feels grim for those of us in our 20s.
That's a really, really wonderful question. Let me think a little bit about a potential story. I think I will. So I'll be thinking a little bit about a rabbinic story, but I want to speak in the moment to the kind of piece about young people's role in the contemporary moment, where I think I would just again lift up the extraordinary work, the extraordinary activism that I see happening, that a lot of which is being led by people in their teens and their 20s. So I think this is a really, I don't want to try and like pull out a silver lining here. I'm really opposed to doing that. But if we work with a kind of paradigm of, maybe you could call it grim hope, right? Tough hope that I'm using, whereby the question isn't just, oh, can we sort of miraculously solve all the problems and put everything back the way it was, but actually becomes a kind of question about ingenuity and capacity to think about creative, powerful responses, justice-centered responses that have both a really clear-eyed look at what might be, because of course we don't know. We don't want to get into a situation of climate doom, right? I think that, but sort of for me, it's been really helpful to hold this invitation to sort of hope as a question that's framed around adaptation, response, and getting our hands really deeply involved in the work of helping each other through. That's the piece that I guess I'm not in this particular moment coming up with a great rabbinic story. I'll take that as I'll take that as an assignment for the future, but Mika, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, I was thinking of the beginning of Mishnah Brachot, the very first halacha, right, where the young people go to a banquet at night, and then they come back and ask their father whether they should pray still, and whether they should still say the Shema. And it's such a strange, why is this the first story in the Mishnah, right? Stories are always significant when they show up in this legal text. And I've always seen it as a lesson of it's the rabbi saying, look, we have survived this catastrophe, and this catastrophe is ongoing, but we can still go to banquets, we can still get married, we can still continue with our lives, and we still pray, because we insist on maintaining these rhythms of life that symbolize and signify the values that we care about. So
that's right. I mean, I think the rabbis are, it's a beautiful application between that story and this particular moment. I think the rabbis really choose over and over again not to be fatalist, right? Mm-hmm. And not to assume that it's all over, right? Right. I'm thinking also of, it's not a young figure, but I'm thinking of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who famously says when the temple is falling, that it's worth trying to. It's actually a conversation. It's really not Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's the later rabbis saying it's worth trying to save a little. And I think that's also, that I think that's a moment that we could also kind of pull on in terms of thinking about climate moment, that it really is worth it. And to think particularly about what that means. I guess I would just urge us also to really think about what that means in terms of bodies, right? And communities, and how we invest deeply in the work of supporting and holding each other.
Agree. So Susanna Bloom asks, First of all, she says that was amazing and thank you. She asks, what adaptations have you made during the pandemic that you'll keep after it ends? After it ends.
Beautiful, beautiful. Right. So I'm not sure quite when it will end for me. And in part because of my own disability experiences, I think it's likely that my end will be later than a lot of other folks. So I'm thinking a lot these days about that experience of the differential experiences of some people being able to go back before others, and how important it is to be mindful of the fact that we aren't all going back to normal in the same way or on the same clock. Another thing I will note is that for disability communities in particular, it's been really the pandemic experience has been, for a number of us, has been really, or the adaptation experience around the pandemic. The pandemic has just sucked. I have nothing good to say about the pandemic, right? But that experience of adaptation has been for some disabled folks really complicated and really bittersweet, in part because a lot of the changes and the adaptations, remote work, for example, have been things that some disabled folks have been asking for and have needed for ages. And we were often told it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too expensive, it's too complicated, it's not good enough. Nope, nope, nope. Right? People lost jobs. People got shut out of education because of being denied those kinds of accommodations. And then in the space of like a week or two, when non-disabled people needed it, it happened so fast. So, of course, it's important to acknowledge that technologies like Zoom have a really different effect for different folks in disability communities. Disability and access is a really multifaceted, multivalent experience. So I'm really aware that there are disabled folks who have been shut out of a lot of this year's experience because Zoom is not accessible to them, things like that. If there wasn't ASL interpretation, if there wasn't captioning, things like that. But for me, honestly, this has been the year that I've had access to everything. And so I'm looking now at a future in which I wonder, was that just a flash in the pan? Is that about to go away? So what I'm hoping to keep, Zoom talks and live streams. And I'm hoping to keep those also as, right, I'm particularly interested in thinking about Zoom events, right, native Zoom events that don't leave Zoomers at a kind of second-class status, but really lean into and take advantage of what that technology can offer, even as I'm also really excited to hopefully at some point one day be able to see some folks outside my city or outside my apartment in person again. I will say I flew too much, right? Apropos of climate change, right? I flew way too much pre-pandemic, and I am thinking very hard now about how to shift the rhythms and expectations of my own rabbinic work and academic work and public speaking work, and in order to be both more sustainable on a climate level and also on a human level. Thanks for a great question.
Oh, I can't help but mention that as you were speaking about how quickly things changed for everyone. It's kind of history of the disability movement too, is that when we were willing to make accommodations for people with disabilities in a wheelchair, like life improved from everyone, right? When we were willing to make sidewalks accessible to wheelchairs, women with strollers or people with strollers and children. Good. Yeah, so I hope that as a society, we learned that lesson, that when we take care of the least of us, we lift up everyone in unexpected ways. Okay, so two more great questions. So Shiloh asks, how do Indigenous communities fit into this conversation? I see a lot of parallels between a post-destruction world of the temple, a post-destruction of the temple world, and a post-colonization world.
Yeah, right. I mean, so I think it's a really marvelous question and such an important one. I've been very deeply appreciative of the work, the deep work and thinking, both intellectual work and activists' spiritual work that is emerging and has been for decades emerging from Indigenous communities. So I answer this question as a settler, as an uninvited guest on land that is not my own. And so I want to tread very carefully here in terms of thinking about that. I do think you're very right that there's a powerful resonance in thinking about the post landscapes, about thinking about, I think one of the things that I have learned deeply from Indigenous literature particularly is the profound complexity of the aftermath, right? And how crucial it is to shift the time scale and the frame that non-Indigenous dominant culture communities often use to approach the question of land, belonging, questions of sovereignty, questions of sustainability. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about very deeply. I think from Indigenous communities, we also can learn tremendously about what it means to work on questions of ecological and environmental commitments in a context that is marked by profound power disparities, so that the question of power and political dominance here, I'm thinking of both the dominance of the U.S. government, but also the dominance of corporate interests, right? Thinking about the pipeline activism that is happening right now, led very significantly by Indigenous communities, that this is another really powerful and crucial place where bringing that that lens to bear can really help deepen our understanding of the stakes and the scope of the fight.
Well, on that note, Allison asks, what important readings would you recommend for anyone interested in starting to study climate change in relation to biblical studies and religious studies? And I also want to know the answer to that question.
Oh, so what a marvelous question. There's, let's see. So I'm going to start actually by first lifting up a work that a couple works that really speak to me that aren't explicitly biblical. So if I may, I'll start by, I mentioned in the talk the work of Eli Clare. Eli Clare is a brilliant disability activist whose recent work, Brilliant Imperfection, Grappling with Cure, is one of the most sensitive and textured accounts of disability politics in relation to environmental engagement and engagement with place, that I think is, I just really, really recommend that work. I also love the work of Rob Nixon, who is an English professor and a scholar of contemporary literature, whose work has been deeply influential to me in terms of thinking about the long arc of climate change, and particularly the disparities of geography and difference. This is something that I've really tried to bring into my own thinking. His concept of slow violence, particularly the idea that we misjudge the nature of crisis, that we're drawn to spectacle, and so just fail to properly attend to the long arc of climate violence has been really, really important. So maybe actually, if it's all right, I'll stop there because it's a little risky to speak closer to home. I'm always afraid of I'll forget three friends in the space of this moment. There's extraordinary work happening in terms of religion, theology, and climate change. And so folks who are interested, I would recommend that you take a look at some of the American Academy of Religion, for example, has some really exemplary work happening in the religion and ecology section. And that can be an extraordinary spot to sort of start orienting yourself to the tremendous riches of this academic field.
Yeah, maybe we'll follow up with you and we can send people who registered a short reading list. I'm kind of obsessed
Beautiful.
with reading lists.
Lovely,
So.
lovely.
Wonderful. Okay, so another question. I don't have a name for this person, but he says that he likes how you speak about bodily autonomy as resistance. Do you believe this should be one like a protected right?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I guess I don't tend to think about it so much. Of course, there are some ways in which rights discourse can be really helpful for thinking about bodily autonomy. We certainly do rely on that to manage some kinds of bodily autonomy, but I actually think that this is a paradigm that's really helpful to bring even beyond just the specific ideas of protected, of particular protected rights. So thinking about body autonomy and thinking about the autonomy of self, right? Because I think it can also be helpful to think about this in terms of the mind, our own inner space, the work of carving out a place of kind of decolonizing the imagination. I come to so much of this through the body, in part because of my own experience as a wheelchair user, as somebody who thinks a lot about bodies. So these conversations about body autonomy and also autonomy of self are really crucial justice questions within disability communities. And I think they also really resonate for me as a feminist, as a queer person. But goes for me beyond the question of who gets to touch or who gets access to the physicality of my flesh. It's also about a kind of different posture of resistance and a capacity for naming and claiming our own ground, the place where we dwell, the place from which we think, the place from which we know, the place from which we dream. And that's what I'd love to widen for all of us.
So, oh, so beautiful. I'm torn between ending it there and asking you to talk a little bit about your next book.
So the next book that I'm working on now is it's called Breath and Bone, Disability Politics and the Bible. And it's a book that's designed for a broad readership. And it's just been extraordinary to work on because it's a chance for me to take, as someone who's spent many years now working with both biblical and rabbinic texts and understanding the ways in which the rabbis thought and the biblical authors thought about disabled bodies and disabled people, right, and disabled minds. This book is an invitation, I've taken it as an invitation to let my own voice, my own spiritual life, my own grappling with these texts come more fully onto the page so that I get to speak back, to think both about the bringing disability culture and disability politics into conversation with biblical and some rabbinic texts, to think about the extraordinary ways in which the biblical material has had an impact on the ways religious folks and secular folks think about bodies and disability in contemporary culture, and also to dream differently, right? To imagine and to enact what it's like to read the Bible on wheels through a disabled gaze. So thank you so much.
I can't wait. We'll have to have you back. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for being so engaged with Professor Julie Watts-Belcer's wonderful talk this evening. Please do join us again on Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific time for the second lecture in this series titled Reading Jewish Texts in Age of Climate Change, the Afterlives of Noah's Ark, Gender, Disability, and the Politics of Survival. Okay, thank you everyone for your attention, and we'll see you on Thursday.